Hello, CharterFolk. This is Jed from a different location, sneaking away with the family to do something of a spring break. So background may look a little different to you, but did not want to give up this time slot because the three people that we have with us today are so busy. I'm just very thankful to have been able to get time with them and to be able to pick their brain about what I think is some of the most important work happening in the United States as it relates to charter schools. The three people are leaders of our state associations in Texas, in California, and in Illinois. And I've invited the three of them because I think those states and those state associations are seen as a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of building political infrastructure for our movement. And I wanted to get an update from them and to see what they would report out to the rest of the country about what's a wise way to keep going forward with this. So we're going to bring the three of them on. And as we do, I am going to do my regular, Wallace over the top raving about each of them because, it's genuine for all the folks that I have here at CharterFolk. I feel great excitement about what these folks are up to, and yet it's even more the case, today. So our first person is Andrew Broy, and Andrew is leading Inks in Illinois. And if there's anybody in the National Charter School movement in the last 10 years, I have referred to as a brother from another mother, more so than I have, Andrew Broy. I can't think of it. It's just Andrew and I have shared so many different discussions together, so many responsibilities together. We've both been on the board of the National Alliance. We've both been grappling with this challenge of building a C3 and C4. And if there's anybody in our country that is smart about this, who we can learn from, if there's anybody that I personally have learned from, it's Andrew Broy. So Andrew, thank you so much for being here with us. Meanwhile, second, we have Starlee Coleman, who is from Texas, leading the Texas Charter Public School Association and their C4 charter schools now, and very excited about the work that Starlee has been doing. The Texas Association really made a very smart decision about 6 or 7 years ago to really evolve itself into an advocacy obsessed organization, and one that would have a C3 and a C4 capacity to it. And they needed to have, an incredible leader take it on at a very important time. I think Starlee's been there about 3 years, if I'm right. And, I would just say that, the name is well chosen. I think we should all try to become rock Starlee, like the Starlee that we've got in Texas, leading the development of our political infrastructure in Texas. So Starlee, thank you so much for being here. And finally, we'll bring on Myrna Castrejón from California Charter School Association. There are so many different ways I can introduce Myrna. I don't know. I'll choose this one today, which is, 12 years ago, they put this Dorothy, in Oz on the first, brick of the yellow brick road, and said march toward the Emerald City of political power for charter schools. And I don't know where Myrna was. I don't know if she was the scarecrow, if she was the the tin woman, if she was the cowardly lion. I don't know. She was one of those first, very first people who, just helped me get smarter, helped me get more courageous, helped me grow more heart, like those three characters did. And we made some progress toward, the Emerald City. So, Myrna, for someone who has been there arm in arm with me, lions and tigers and bears for the last 12 years, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you to all three of you guys for being here.
Good to be with you, Jed.
Great to be here.
Hello, hello.
All right, cool. Well, let's just dive right into where things stand in our different states and where things stand in our associations. I'm particularly interested in what you guys think the COVID challenge has done to our standing. And, if there is something that is either opening up new opportunities for us, or if there are new risks. Would love to just get the lay of the land from the three of you. I don't know, Starlee, would you mind going first for us from Texas?
Sure. It seems like COVID has reminded lawmakers why families need options in the first place, that the same thing doesn't work for every family for a whole variety of reasons. So that's helpful. to refresh people on the principles and the needs to give families choices. I don't know that, I don't know what it's like, obviously, in other states. A good chunk of the schools in Texas, even the district schools, opened on time and in person here in Texas, and most charter schools did as well. So, most of our kids are back on campuses in Texas. That said, there's still, a whole lot of kids who are, missing, which I know that is a situation in other states. There was a little surge in charter enrollment this year. I don't know if that'll be permanent or not, just unsure, of course, what will happen when everybody's back on campuses full time next fall. But I do think there is there's just a renewed focus, I think, on innovative practices, and of course getting charters to lean in on that and lead the way is an opportunity, of course, that we shouldn't miss. I don't know. I would be curious what Andrew and Myrna have to say about that too. Certainly in Texas, like, our school leaders were drinking from a fire hose trying to accommodate all of the changes that came from COVID, and they just were not in the headspace of, like, okay, wow, things could be really different now. How can we blow the doors off of innovation? That just was not the headspace they were in. And I mean, if I had been in their shoes, that certainly is not where I would have been thinking either. But maybe other states are seizing that opportunity more.
Thank you, Starlee. Hey, either one. Myrna, do you want to go from California?
Sure, happy to. I agree with Starlee that when this pandemic really upended the entire world, the core basics of survival and providing for the basic needs of families really came to the forefront. And for me, it was actually a reminder of what an important public institution charter schools are. And in California, as I know, it was the case throughout the country. When I saw charter schools deploying that nimbleness and that flexibility, not necessarily to innovate, although I do think that there was some innovation there, but actually to turn on a dime and feed entire districts that were struggling to reorient themselves to the moment and provide hotspots, Chromebooks, hot meals. Even in Los Angeles, the district opened 60 large meal distribution sites. Our charter schools, 24 hours earlier, opened double that amount. And time and again, I saw entire communities really stepping up and stay incredibly well attuned to the needs of their families and their communities. I've also rarely ever seen collaboration at this level. While I don't think that it was necessarily the case that brand new things erupted in this moment, certainly the fact that we have as part of our family a wide diversity of educational modalities and people connecting with each other to learn from each other, the blended learning schools helping the traditional site-based schools, the non-classroom based schools talking about how do you actually measure engagement in distance learning, and that openness and banding together that occurred across the state was really quite unprecedented. It's almost as if the entire movement went open source for a moment. And so I think it's carved a new groove for us as an association, as a state, as a community. We just celebrated our virtual conference, which typically is like the biggest gathering and celebration. And the level of engagement and joy as people were sharing ideas from the front lines and really leaned into a very different tone and tenor around how do we come back better? How do we keep each other safe? How do we keep pushing each other to the edge to ensure that when we come back, we don't repeat the same, certainly not mistakes, but it really, the pandemic revealed sort of our weak spots, if you will. And how do we use this newfound energy for collaboration to fill in those cracks for each other and lift each other up? I think that's almost as innovative as a new pedagogical delivery. because it reminded us that our task and our work, above all things, is fundamentally relational. And I'm looking forward to how do we come back. I'm sure that just like as we pivoted faster and better into distance learning, we'll probably come back better and stronger as well in this phased reopening. That in California, it's not been like Texas. It's highly political. We're not back by a long shot. In fact, schools are just beginning to come back, and we've got a long way to go. But I do see that charters are again, being able to do these massive pivots more nimbly.
Thank you, Myrna. Andrew, want to take a run at it?
Sure. And I'm going to borrow from Myrna's talk. I liked her phrase about a new groove happening for the charter movement in California. I feel like we had a similar experience here in Illinois. And I want to focus on two discrete areas, one that doesn't get much attention, and then one that does, one on autonomy and one on innovation. So one of the things that was really beneficial early on is that the governance model of chartering is that nonprofit governing boards make decisions for the school. And what that allowed us to do in March of last year, when the pandemic hit and things shut down, is convene board members and talk about how they might go forward. And I remember being on many, many, many Zoom calls with many different charter boards across Illinois and explaining how they might navigate this. And what you saw was very quick movement, very effective towards feeding their population, towards thinking about access, towards ensuring connectivity for all their families, getting devices distributed. We had a huge device distribution late in March of last year. And what all of that did was show that the charter governance model is able to move quickly and adaptively to serve student needs immediately. Meanwhile, large districts in Illinois were struggling to think about how to procure vendors or how to go through an expedited process. And the system of big city school districts is not set up to deliver that as nimbly and as flexibly. And so that was a moment of highlight for what the charter movement can become. Secondly, after the long summer and some of our member schools began opening up in a hybrid fashion in the fall, we thought very hard and long about how to do it effectively and serve families both synchronously and asynchronously if they're at home. And one thing we saw a lot of our member schools do, particularly the more advanced networks, is try to leverage teacher quality beyond what they had been doing before. So instead of thinking in the old frame of one teacher for every 25 students, they thought about leveraging their best, most experienced instructor in a discrete content area and having that teacher educate many more students, and then using other teachers as learning coaches at the same time. So in some respects, we saw some innovation coming out of necessity, and it sped up our movement towards trying to leverage our best teaching. But the last thing I'll say, which I've kind of witnessed personally and has really made a mark in my mind, is just how much we've been able to expand our blended learning models and some of our virtual learning. We've had schools doing this for many, many years in Chicago and downstate, but it wasn't until this pandemic occurred that many more schools benefited from their learnings. So it's kind of forced some knowledge across the movement in ways that really live up to the charter movement's ideal of sharing best practices, leveraging what works, and centering all decisions around the benefits of students. And because of all that, I think there has been some real opportunity to be more effective and then hopefully spread these ideas beyond just charter public schools and towards public schools more broadly.
So I love you guys using that language, groove. I certainly have been talking for a long time. In 2018, 2019, there were some political dynamics that were beginning to congeal in many different parts of the country that were not as favorable for charter schools as we had seen before. And COVID has come along. And I also think some of those dynamics were ready to calcify into ways that could have stayed in place for a decade or longer, who knows? And it just feels like COVID has come along and wiped all of the things that were potentially congealing off the map and giving us a chance to lay new grooves. And some of them I think are already starting to emerge, and I think they're really quite positive. I think one of the things that the one piece of data that I found most confusing was the Education Next poll that said that parents actually weren't frustrated with their schools or with their unions or with others from the establishment. I just had another conversation with another national polling entity last week, and they were like, no, we have found out that's not the case. So then they're supposedly going to report some data that reflects my own personal experience over and over and over again, different states, different organizations, that the public is uniquely irritated, uniquely disappointed in what our public education system is doing. There's some oblique understanding that maybe charter schools are doing something different. And so that opens up a level of opportunity now in 21 that just simply wasn't there in 2019. I don't know. I want to jump to the next thing, but does anybody want to jump in on that specific way of thinking about it? Because I can go straight to my topic at hand, which is your guys' political infrastructure and how you think it's helped you. Because for all three of your states, if I were asked how is the fact that you've got more mature political infrastructure helped you in the last year, I just think there's some stories that just absolutely pop. But you guys tell them better than me. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'd like to take a swing at your earlier question, Jed, because I think it's really important to not to overcomplicate things, but also to make sure that we're not oversimplifying. This is a moment of tremendous transition, and people are really reacting to changes and shifts in even the scientific guidance being issued by the CDC, and the state of flux has created a wide array of responses that actually do anchor to what their experience has been in the traditional system, what their current experience is. Certainly geography, race, and class play a role in it as well. And I would just simply caution that one of the things we're encountering in California, where this issue of return to school has become so ridiculously politicized and polarized down to the utmost extremes, right? That issues, especially about the learning experience and race and class, have become weaponized for people advancing certain arguments for or against reopening, or in which modality, that I would really caution that we need to resist that single narrative and using parent experience in a universalizing way for or against one way or the other. What we are seeing is that there's a collection of complicated experiences that have to do with, for example, if the students are and the families are essential workers, have they experienced a death in the family? To what degree has the charter school been really strong and good at building a network of support for families, like parent-to-parent tutoring, access to counselors and mental health professionals, and that conditions their experience and their willingness to go back in person in this moment. There's a lot of fear mongering, a lot of people that claim that they are on the side of data and science, and we have to be very careful that doesn't get weaponized in ways that are counterproductive to what the mission and the orientation of the charter schools are. There are a number of charter schools have done such a good job of building community that their families, even if they are serving essential workers and the most vulnerable, are hesitant to return. Because they lost grandma and they lost auntie, and they don't necessarily want to rush back. And there are others who are so frustrated in the traditional public school system in particular, especially if they're special ed students and haven't been able to access any kind of supports, and they watch their children regressing significantly, that they are desperate to go back, even if it means a certain risk tolerance, that it's a different kind of profile. Our advice to all of our schools has simply been: make sure you stay tightly aligned with your community, with your families, with your teachers. The vaccination is here. The rush to reopen, if you will, there's no question that in person is better. But in in either way, the policy arguments can't get dislocated and disconnected from people's legitimate experiences of tremendous trauma and loss in this moment. And that should be integrated into your plans for return. Sorry for the soapbox, but it's frustrating here, especially in Los Angeles.
Please, not the soapbox at all. Just smart comment from Myrna Castrejón, as always. Love it. Starlee or Andrew, did you want to amplify anything?
My comment actually might be a good bridge to what you want to talk about, Jed, which is on the advocacy side. So Andrew, if you were going to jump in with something unrelated to advocacy, I just got a little bit of like COVID silver lining from some lawmakers last week that I thought was interesting and worth sharing.
Yeah, at one point, to underscore something Myrna said, is that early on we did an analysis of where COVID was impacting families in Chicago and where our schools are. And there's a pretty heavy overlap between where our schools are geographically located and the communities hardest hit by COVID, both in terms of workers hardest hit and then negative health outcomes. And so when we thought about reopening and helping our member schools think through that, it was always our assumption we wanted to offer a choice to families, to say to a family, if you would like to have an in-person option or a community care option, we'll make that happen. But any student that wants to stay home for a variety of reasons will do so. And it's up to our movement to serve the student in that setting as effectively. And that put a lot of burdens on teachers and administrators to think through that. But out of that, I think, came a recognition that you had to provide that choice to a family. And what we see in districts is this either or on-off switch problem that I think is inappropriate to the challenge right now.
Amen. Love that. Exactly what I've seen in so many different places. So thank you, Andrew, for that. Starlee, please take it away. Love to hear about silver linings here.
Yeah, so I had dinner with two separate lawmakers last week, a Democrat and a Republican. And the Republican was telling me that here in Texas, I don't know what it's like, in other states necessarily right now, but the time that lawmakers are actually spending together right now, like on the floor of the House or the Senate, is really limited right now. And lobbyists are not in and out of people's offices like they normally are. And the, sort of group dinners and stuff that normally happen during session, like that's just not happening. And so this was the Republican telling me all of this. And he was saying that he thinks for us that sort of limited information flow, like for the charter community, is going to end up being really beneficial for us this session, because charter opponents who outnumber us, everywhere, right, all over the country and every state capital, are sidelined too, right? So we're not at such like a rumor mill disadvantage like we normally are, which I thought was really interesting. And then separately, I was talking to a Democrat who said that for the first time ever this session, she actually took a minute to look at the one-pagers that all the education groups gave her of their agendas, to actually look at what we're writing down. And she said, you know what struck me? Your agenda is about kids and the district's agenda is about money. And I was like, wow, you noticed that. That's cool. Well, so that's great for us, right? Like if lawmakers are starting to realize, like, we're down there at the Capitol trying to talk to them about kids, and the other team is down there trying to talk about money, we're gonna win.
Starlee, I love all this. Can you also, I'm going to prompt you on, just you to brag about, what you guys are doing a little bit more too. I mean, you guys had an absolutely pivotal election in 2018 as far as control of the state house goes. And your C4 was active as it had never been before. And there have been some, frankly, rather stunning political dynamics that have come out of that, at least, as an observer from a national landscape. Can you just acquaint some of our viewers with what those broad strokes look like?
Yeah. So in 2020, there was a big play.
I'm sorry, 2020. I didn't mean 2018. I screwed that up. Sorry about that.
Anyway, so in 2020, there was a real chance, or we thought anyway, that there was a real chance that Democrats would take the Texas House. So that would have been the first time in 20 years that one of the chambers would have been controlled by Democrats. It was like eye-popping amounts of money spent to try to flip the Texas House. And the charter community in Texas, we have just really relied on Republicans being in charge for such a long time. And we just have not built that bench of support that we needed to build with Democrats. We have a good handful of supporters in the Democratic caucus, but not nearly where we need to be if they were going to be in charge. So that was a really scary moment for us because when I got here, I just kept telling people we just need a little bit more time before that demographic trend that's happening in Texas becomes our reality. We just weren't ready for that. So in 2020, we needed to figure out what our lane was going to be because there was so much money sloshing around on both sides in Texas. Republicans trying to keep the House, Democrats trying to win the House, and all of that stuff that we needed to try to figure out what we were going to do, where we were going to try to make an impact. And what we decided to do was focus on people who are connected to charter schools. So charter school parents, grandparents, and educators and staff members that we could find, connect them, to the voter file, figure out where they live. And if they were in one of those House districts that were in play, to make sure that they knew the difference between the candidates on charter issues. We weren't always aligned with Republicans, of course, because our issue doesn't break down that way. There were, a handful of seats where the Democrat was better for us on charters than the Republican. And certainly in the primaries, that's, lots of pro-charter Republicans, anti-charter Republicans, pro-charter Dems, anti-charter Dems on both sides. But we had a really successful outing in the 2020 elections. The vast majority of the races where the Texas Charter PAC engaged, the pro-charter candidate won, and among charter connected voters, we saw that we were able to pretty significantly swing people to vote for the pro-charter candidate, even if it wasn't someone that they normally would align with party-wise. So it was a big deal for us, and that caught a lot of lawmakers' attention. Of course, when we can show them that we can make charters a voting issue for people in their district, and we can convince people to vote outside of their party preference simply on a candidate's position on charter issues. That changes the conversation at the Capitol in a hurry for lawmakers.
That's great. Thank you, Starlee. I mean, I've learned over and over again, don't stress too much linearity, right? There's all sorts of things that are going on, but historically, you've had a governor, lieutenant governor who've been supportive, but not willing to take extra steps. And now you've got a governor and lieutenant governor who are making some of your priorities at the association amongst their top priorities as well, which could really translate into accelerated growth for charter schools in Texas.
Oh, no doubt about that. Yeah, the two two roadblocks that we have to charter growth right now are both the lieutenant governor who runs our Senate and the governors on their short list of priorities, to remove our roadblocks, which is pretty cool.
Pretty amazing. Andrew, take a run at it. You told me some great anecdotes already from Chicago and from Illinois more broadly.
Yeah, so our political environment is a bit different than Starlee's, as you might imagine. Texas and Illinois are different states. We are a blue state, and every statewide elected official is a Democrat in Illinois, and the Democratic Party controls both chambers, the House and Senate, by supermajorities. So we really have to work with and through our Democratic Party leadership to move things. We've been a bipartisan PAC and political organization since our inception. But we noticed something about 6 or 7 years ago, that there were certain Democrats who represented districts that had a heavy charter presence. Literally thousands of families were attending high-quality charter public schools in those districts. And some of those Democrats, not all, but some, weren't very supportive of the charter issue in Springfield. And so we went about designing a plan and the strategy to first get those individuals in the schools to see them and hear from their constituents and talk to the grandmas and the moms and the aunties all across their district about why they chose this school and why it was a great choice for their child. And then after that, kind of general policy work. We started doing political work in the 2016 cycle, in the primary cycle, similar to what Starlee just described. So we identified charter households. We identified from the voter file how many proven voters there were in those households, looking at the last 2 or 3 election cycles. And we defined a proven voter as voting the last 2 of 3 election cycles. And then we did a range of kind of outreach and mail and door knocking and phone calls to those households to try to persuade them why one candidate was better than the other candidate. Now, many states have a legislative process that draws maps that tends to favor the party in power. Illinois is not an exception there. The 2010 map tended to favor Democratic control. And so most of the action in these highly charter-intensive districts was in the primary cycle. So we had many different races where you had an incumbent Democrat running who might not have been good for charter schools and a challenger who was good. And so our ability in these generally low turnout primary election cycles to leverage the votes of, say, 2,000 or 1,500 charter households in a way that provided several thousand votes could be dispositive in several races. And so we really made our reputation in 16 by winning a handful of primary races and replacing incumbents. And because those tended to be safe Democratic districts, you didn't have to worry too much about the general election in the fall. And so slowly, brick by brick, we built up more and more Democratic support in the Black Caucus, particularly for charter schools in Chicago. And then we just built on that year over year. And so every cycle, we're engaged, we're active. We've now launched a new effort effective January this year to recruit and train the next generation of political leader. And those are going to be charter school alumni. We have a large number of charter alums now who are in their late 20s, early 30s, getting active in politics. And a bunch of them have raised their hand and said, we want to run for office. Can you help us? And we're not one to shy away from a challenge. So we've launched our Inks Action Fellowship and Campaign School program. And we're going to seek to have 15 to 20 charter alums selected by May, trained by this fall, and then actively campaigning for office in 2022, general and primary, and the 2023 municipal elections, which is the city of Chicago elections, where every alderman's up, the mayor's up, and we may have other races that matter to us. And so in my view, if you want to build long-term policy influence in a state capital, you've got to do this political work. It's not optional. It's indispensable. And you can start small and build over time. And the lessons you learn along the pathway just make you more effective and better as a practitioner going forward. There's nothing that can replace really strong political work in terms of getting legislative results in a state capital.
Thank you, Andrew. Awesome. Myrna, what would you most want to highlight about latest political work and dynamics in California?
Wow. Well, the story of California really, obviously there was a massive pivot in 2018 that brought, I'm going to one up you, Andrew. You have a super majority. We had a giga majority. Like 80% Democrats, basically. And so, the dynamics over here, we're not just blue, we're navy or indigo. I don't know, like what's darker than dark in the blue spectrum. And we all know what happened, right? Labor, a unified front of labor took on not just us, but tech, on with AB5 and eliminating the gig economy, and the effects of that were very much felt very immediately. For us, it forced us to some compromises that were by a long shot not death, but not great. And we were marked for death without question. But something really curious happened in the 2020 election, and that is that California swung back slightly to center. The Republicans gained some seats in the legislature. 6 additional Republicans went to the congressional delegation. Labor actually advanced numerous initiatives. I think it was 5 initiatives that they were backing, 3 that they were funding primarily, that went down to defeat, including a school bond. Like, who votes against school bonds when we have a falling infrastructure in a blue state? And, you can't overread that, but I do believe that it was a correction of sorts. And right now we're in a position of playing defense. We haven't swung back to the place where we say where we can see a very, the threat is not over, first of all. Divide and conquer is our opponent's preferred method of attack, and that is to separate the family, non-classroom based schools versus site-based schools, urbans versus suburbans, and rurals. And the biggest part of our task is keeping the family together and aligned and voting together across party lines and across typologies, right? But it is a game of defense right now. The politics are ridiculous. Gavin Newsom, who danced to the finish line in the 2018 election, is facing a recall. It is an almost certainty that he will be that the recall will be on the ballot, and a lot of that has to do with basically. Of course, it's the pandemic. There's a reaction to that, as I was talking about at the top, a real confusion around do teacher unions stand for the public good, or are they protecting, teachers who want to stay home, which is a massive oversimplification of what's happening, but that's a public narrative out there. The speed of the vaccine rollout, the shutdowns, we are still shut down for the most part, and that is. It's extracting a political price from Democrats, and there are a number of moderates and independents who are basically saying it is not healthy to have a single party rule at any level, whether it's local government or at the highest levels of state government, and are yearning to send a message of sorts. The reality of it is that elections are big and sexy. They're also ridiculously expensive in big states like Illinois, Texas, and California. And while we continue to be very active with PACs and independent expenditures, it's also true that given our political condition, we've gotten smarter at guerrilla warfare and retail politics. And what that means is it's not just about winning the elections. Let's not also forget that the care and feeding of members through consistent constituent service and ongoing donations to their reelections campaigns, which are small ball dollars, can very easily be accomplished and is accomplished through local PACs and local coalitions of charter leaders that can stay on top of these elections. It's also, for us, incredibly important in this last electoral cycle to remember that it's not just the state house that's important, but also county boards of education, the supervisors. When in the negotiation of the 2019 legislative session, our appeal rights got curbed. That raised the stakes and the importance of counties. And frankly, labor doesn't have nearly as much traction in those levels than they do in local districts, where we seem to be playing this game of Groundhog Day of electing and re-electing boards. Then when their terms end, here goes the fight all over again. So we've been targeting purple districts. I'm sure you're going to tell the story, and you can actually tell it better than me, Jed, of iLead and their independent parents who were hounding Christy Smith and flipped that election when she tried to go to Congress. It's important also to continue to do good work with Democrats who are social justice Democrats and see the good work that we're doing in the urban center, and are not wanting to stray too far apart from what their folks need, even if they are reflexively pro-labor. It's just a different layer of deep politics that gets played, and the reality of it is I'm curious to see what's going to happen post recall. The governor has one more year. The governor has been instrumental in holding the line, because I just want to be really clear that they really were out to kill us. And even though the line went perhaps further than we'd wanted, it nonetheless, for the next two legislative cycles, last one and this one, I've been able to say to good effect, we cut the deal, the war is over, no more negative legislation. There is some some legislation out there trying to curb non-classroom based work that's a leftover from 2019. We're going to do everything we can to continue to but people are worried about jobs, the economy, and reopening schools in general. The governor's also concerned on top of this about the recall. Our legislature continues to meet via Zoom, and not necessarily, taking in-person testimony. These are opportunities. These are tremendous opportunities. I would absolutely say, and the last thing I'm going to say, is this is the time for scaling it up, on retail politics. Legislators aren't doing the travel that they're doing. They're dying to meet with constituents. It's much easier to get 50, 100 parents on a Zoom than it is to bust them anywhere. You need to exploit those opportunities and remember that those local relationships and local dollars really matter.
All right, that's great. I can see that, like, my short list of must ask questions, I'm not even going to get to. So I'll try to cut to some other things. No. I love what you guys are saying. But one for sure is you guys are ahead of the rest of the country in terms of building this political infrastructure. There has been maybe a lack of urgency. Maybe there's been ambivalence, maybe just a naivete about how important, this kind of stuff is. Do you guys have new language for your colleagues in other states about the importance of doing this? Would love to just, quickly whip around. This is that moment to evangelize. Would love to hear whatever your latest, language is about why it's so important that we're all doing this.
I'll jump in. One of the first conversations that I had with a lawmaker when I got here a couple of years ago was he basically said, look, things have changed for the charter community at the Capitol, and you guys do not seem to have internalized the political change that has happened here. And he said, you cannot continue to expect people to take hard votes for you if you are not going to make sure that they come back in their elections. And in that year, that was in 2018, there were a couple of, big time charter supporters who lost their elections that year. And, we were nowhere for them. And, that we will not survive that. We will not, as a community, we will not survive politics being harder for us, the National Democratic Coalition falling apart completely for charters. We will not survive that in any state if we do not make a commitment to making sure that our friends are protected when we need them to.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many lobbyists we have. It doesn't matter, right? If our friends don't come back from hard elections, they're not going to keep taking votes for us.
Yeah, to follow on Starlee's point, when we were growing the movement relatively rapidly, we had twin winds at our back. We had two Chicagoans in D.C., President Obama and Arne Duncan, who were both talking a lot about what charter public schools accomplished in the city of Chicago. And that gave us a huge halo effect with local legislators. So when Race to the Top happens in 2009, 10, 11, we have this real wind in our back and didn't have to build up advocacy muscle in the same way. But this is politics. Things change, right? And we saw it coming well in advance and prepared around that. Your question, Jed, about what I would say to other state association leaders, I would say it's really a two-step process first. The first thing you've got to realize is that most associations should have as their primary focus advocacy work and goals. Membership support is really important, but it is to the extent it's important because it builds your advocacy ability and muscle, not as a earned revenue model separate and apart from that. And then once you've oriented yourself around advocacy goals, big state legislative wins, city council wins, etc., it's a natural progression to move towards political influence and independent expenditure work and some PAC work and donations and kind of bundling campaign contributions, because that is how you can further a lot of the legislative objectives. And if you don't do both those things in tandem, you're going to leave out an ingredient that's really necessary to bake the cake. And for us, we've always said that our principal goal at Inks is to create a state and local policy environment that supports the growth and nurturance of great charter schools. That's our goal. It's our single aim. And we can measure ourselves on that. Can we pass a bill? Can we defeat a bill? Can we win a race? Can we get equal funding? Can we secure facilities? Are we part of the Capitol bill? We're tested every year. And since it's March Madness, I like to look at scoreboards a lot. And I can look at the scoreboard and say, we got equal funding in 2017. We got a 10-year renewal term in 2018. We got Capitol bill inclusion in 2019. So now what's the question? Can I defeat this bill I've got right now trying to change our governance model? I hope so, and we'll see. Because that's every year the challenge we have to create the environment where our member schools can grow and thrive.
Amen, brother. Myrna, turn to my sister. Take it. What's anything you would be saying to colleagues in other states about the necessity of starting this work or accelerating it?
I don't know that I could add anything to Starlee and Andrew's brilliance here. I would co-sign to everything both of them said. But especially to the point that Andrew's making around like the prioritization. There's no question that the movement in general really is going through a really big transition or an evolution. With that transition comes uncertainty, a North Star, philanthropic shifts. Growth has been the North Star forever. I'll tell you one of the things that I'm really worried, like at a 100,000 foot level, this coalition that's pushing against testing, that's pushing against the notion of performance. Perhaps I've become too paranoid, but it certainly feels like when you couple that discourse, right, around we're over testing, it's too narrow, it's too this, and a push against that, right? And also, our opponents have relentlessly messaged that our success comes at somebody else's expense, right? And that expense is material, it's measurable, and it's inequitable and unjust. No matter what academic studies come out to nuance the question, that headline in the public's mind is incredibly difficult to move, right? So what happens if the national political discourse continues to move around prioritizing the needs of vulnerable students and at what expense, right? And then we move the conversation around performance. What is the singular North Star position that charter schools can continue to do? And I would posit that requires a different politics, a different broader thinking for us. I do believe that the day of innovation really is a challenge for us. With all of this question of blended learning and hybrids, I don't believe that we're going to just magically go back to the fall like the way things were in 2019. How does that open an opportunity for us to really transform and finally break that shackling that has plagued us for so long between butts and seats and mastery, right? And getting in the way of these innovative modes. And we know how to do it, and we know how to do it well. At a grander level, I think we need to think about how do we infuse innovation into the discourse, into the politics, into the things that we enable our schools to do, recognizing that our primary role has to be and will forever need to be advocacy first. But to me, if we lose playing the opportunities to play offense and broaden the discourse about why charters, or to just continue to anchor on growth, and not expand beyond that, then I believe we're going to be slow to react and respond appropriately to a very changed and evolved dynamics.
So I have two more questions. I don't know if we can get to both of them. Now I'm like going to switch the order of them because of what Myrna just said. I'll hope that we have maybe we can go an hour and 2 minutes. I don't know. Whatever. We'll see here. Let's switch because I'll switch them. What is the policy agenda that we need now to drive the kind of narrative that Myrna is talking about? This is one of the things I've been just broken recording here at at CharterFolk. I think that our old historical things are still right for us to be fighting for facilities funding, freedom. Okay, we got to keep doing that, of course. But in terms of driving a narrative that is going to position our movement for the long term, I think there are new things that we have to be doing. Would love to hear your guys, and that is, by the way, a red state phenomenon as much as it is a blue state phenomenon, because I have met with legislators in unnamed red state that told me, hey, look, I'm willing to do anything for you, but you guys keep coming back and asking me to do the same thing that you asked me to do a decade ago. And you're complaining about our narrative. What's the narrative? What's different? What's the vision here, right? So anything you guys want to throw in here about whether, something new is needed, and any specific ideas you might have about what that agenda might be?
Yeah, I've got an example I'd like to bring up, Jed. So we did an analysis in Chicago of enrollment patterns over time a couple of years ago, where we looked at all the students that attended schools they weren't zoned for and what the effect of that migration was. And this is across school type. This included charter public schools and military schools and magnet schools and theme schools. And what we found out, much to our surprise, was that fully 75% of high school students attending the Chicago public schools were attending a school they weren't zoned for. And that of those moving, 97% went from a lower performing school to a higher performing school. Now, charters were a large part of that story, but they weren't the whole story, right? And so this idea that charters have citywide enrollment zones and can attend any school in the city, but the rest of the city has these narrowly drawn attendance zones, suggests to me that if more students are benefiting by open enrollment, why don't we have the charter flexibility model where you can choose the best school, extend to all public schools in the city? The benefit to students is really unassailable, and you'd wind up having outcomes we'd like to see more broadly distributed. So I think there are plenty of examples like that where charter innovation can spread beyond the walls of charter schools and be a lesson for a district in terms of how they organize and structure the delivery of education.
Andrew, have you been able to get traction on that with lawmakers? Like we tried to put that on our agenda this year, and lawmakers, like our most progressive Democrats, our most conservative Republicans, and everywhere in between, was like, oh, hell no, I am not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Have you been able to get anybody to do it?
Not with legislators. We work through and with the district CEOs and school boards. We've had some interest there, but as you all know, when you start touching attendance zone decision-making, the implications in terms of property values, assumptions about race, class, ethnicity, etc., are so volatile, it's hard to have a frank discussion. That's why what we did is said, look, this isn't even a charter study. This is just saying the average student who moves from their zone school to a different school goes up 2 ranking points in our school quality rating policy. That's just a fact. So how do we do more of that and empower parents to make these decisions? State law might not need to change even. A district can decide to do that, but there's enormous pushback because it's challenging a very embedded status quo idea that I live here and therefore I have a right that's inviolate to go to this school. Well, that may work for some people, but as we've seen in the charter movement, it doesn't work for a large number of people who have no access to high-performing schools unless they go outside their zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like one of the really interesting issues, Jed, that you raise, and I know you and I've had a little bit of a debate about this. Sometimes, like the problem to me is that polling shows us nationally from a long time ago and from recently that if people feel like programs are targeted to some kids and not other kids, they have less support, right? And that's for sort of school choice programs broadly, but including charter schools. Like one of the problems that we have is this narrative that Myrna mentioned, that our success comes at the expense of someone else. And so if we keep otherizing ourselves and our kids, and we don't talk about all kids benefiting, I don't know how we win. I mean, obviously, you look nationally, and in most states, the the demographic profile of the kids in charters, is what it is. It's there, we are largely focused on low income children of color across the country. That is not the case in every state though, right? I'm from Arizona, and that's not what the charter community looks like in Arizona. And so if we make suburban schools that where their demographics are largely middle class white kids, a pariah within our own movement, that creates problems for us. It creates problems for us with suburban lawmakers. So there's like this tension about this narrative issue that is really hard to resolve, I think.
Mary, any additional thoughts?
No, I just I completely agree with Starlee that it's a difficult needle to thread. I do believe that we'll see what happens, right? I think we're going to see a lot of things really change. LA Unified, for example, can't seem to find 14,000 students. There's some massive enrollment loss across California. They're not necessarily coming to charters. By the way, the California movement just hit the 700,000 mark in enrollment, but that wasn't still a massive, dramatic increase, which is what all districts were worried about would happen. But it'll be very interesting to see whether this enrollment loss is just a feature of kindergartners delaying entrance, the transition points. If families are actually moving to Texas or Arizona, or were they just in a vacation home in Tahoe? And I'm talking about the system at large. What is the impact going to be to privates and to non-classroom based schools? That I don't have a great predictor of what's going to happen when things begin to come back to normal, but I do know certain things, and just a little bit of a window. I do know that we are facing a massive wave of retirement of teachers this year. The pandemic has been, well, it's been more than a year now, has been absolutely brutal in the teaching profession. We have both challenges and opportunities in terms of diversifying the educator workforce. The schools that have been best positioned to navigate the rigors of the pandemic have been those that have been incredibly flexible in their staffing models and sending in, counselors and other mental health professionals, paraprofessionals to play supporting roles in distance learning and the manning of tech pods. It could potentially be the state may very well be forced to expand charter-like staffing flexibilities across the entire system because of the simple challenges of the workforce and what the pandemic in the next year may bring. That could be some opportunities. It made me think of you, Jed, when I hear folks in policy circles talking about the staffing flexibilities and making charters, or rather traditional district schools, unshackle them from some of the bureaucratic burdens and the traditional ways in which things have been done in a way that will be more charter-like. And I do believe that there will be some opportunities for us to play a leading role in showing how it can be done and can be done well, and making common cause with the alphabet soup, right? With the management groups and others who are trying to solve for the same thing and still stay tacked and anchored to that all kids message, but using our lessons and our flexibility and our need. We're going to face the same thing as well. Those staffing concerns are going to hit us as well. Perhaps not as much as the traditional system, but for sure, we're going to see a massive tectonic shift come fall, both on enrollment and staffing, and how do we account for learning, and whether families are going to be wanting to re-sign up for the choices that they had made before.
That's great. Can you guys indulge me like 4 more minutes? We're going to go over this hour, but I have to ask this last question, all right? Which is, because I think it's central to everything that we've been talking about, which I've been calling it 25 by 25 by 25. Can we get 25 states? that, we'll be charging $25 per student in membership dues by 2025, releasing tens of millions of dollars, for charter school advocacy. It all comes in on the C3 side, and I think it gives our C3 organizations the basic capacity that allows them to do that C4 thing. Now, it's maybe too much of a softball, and you guys are going to say, oh, yes, because it's going to benefit your organizations. But can you just tell me, am I right to just keep beating on this drum? Or Wallace, you don't even understand it. You're so off-putting. Shut up already, or whatever it is. Whatever your recommendations are on this 25 by 25 by 25 thing, is it helpful? And, whatever thoughts you might have on it.
I'll jump in on that. Look, I don't know if $25 is the right dollar, right, for every state. Here, our combined budgets across all of our organizations, the C3, the C4, and the PAC, is basically $7 million, right? And our opponents, just on the C3 side, the sort of 15 group anti-charter coalition, their annual budget is $165 million. So even if we were charging $50 a kid, we wouldn't be anywhere close to $165 million. So I don't know if $25 is the magic number. What I think you're getting at, though, is more than the specific dollar amount, is back to what Andrew said. We have to make a shift as a community that the state charter associations, like, yes, we can do some good PD and some, create some training opportunities and help source vendors and all of those kinds of things. But like, if that's at this point in our life cycle as a movement nationwide, if that's what you're relying on your charter association to do, and it's not to protect you at your state capital, you are directing your association to work on something that is not their highest and best value for you. And if we're not making an investment in advocacy, and if we're not committed to that as our number one priority, we won't win. And so whatever the dollar amount is, right, it's more, I think we need to just get everyone aligned around this idea that this is the number one thing. There's nothing more important to this movement than making sure that we can effectively fight. And we cannot effectively fight with $0.
Anything else you want to throw in, Andrew or Myrna?
Yeah, I just add that it's really a question of fiscal sustainability and economic model for charter associations. And provided you can have sufficient revenues to run a robust organization, hire the staff you need, and not worry about the next earned revenue model that you're going to try to develop, and you can focus your time and attention on your highest use of advocacy wins, and I don't care if it's $25, $50, or $10. Now, I do believe skin in the game matters, and I do believe there's a moment of clarity when you send that dues notice out, and the school has to say, yes, I'm sending a check of $30,000 to the network because I think they do great work. If you don't have that endorsement and they're not willing to do that, then you've got to be introspective about that and say, what is it about my work that isn't translating to passion to support these? We've had good success supporting Inks over the years, and we've been steadily increasing our dues, and that'll continue. So I like the direction of what you're describing, 25 by 25 by 25. I think each seat has to decide where they are, but the goal should be fiscal sustainability and an economic model that permits you to do the work that's most important for the movement.
Myrna, final word.
Again, can't add anything that's of different or greater value than what my colleagues here have said. Completely agree. And I would just say, focus is incredibly important. And focus sometimes mean a narrowing of the things that you can do. Around CCSA, a phrase we keep perhaps overusing internally as we analyze every single action is the member value proposition. How does this contribute to the MVP? The MVPs are the members, and how that's defined is by bringing home the wins, whether it's in local advocacy, with districts that we're constantly fighting authorizers, especially in like the mega districts like LA Unified and Oakland. And the political fights are almost more violent than in the Capitol, but the Capitol wins are incredibly important there as well. And I completely agree. It's a question of prioritization, a focus, and absolute clarity about why we are there to do it. And skin in the game is important. Back in when I learned organizing in Texas, my mentor always talked about making sure that people felt the sense of agency and investment. And the opposite of that is learned helplessness, right? When people expect you to fix everything, and sometimes you're not the best position to do that particular work. This is an all of us work, and it's not a failure of the associations to not do everything for everybody. But I certainly would feel like, it would be a failure of all of us together of understanding the gravity and the potential of the moment. If we don't all understand what our respective role is to play and staying aligned and together through this moment. All the movements, politics, it all runs on a pendulum, right? And I'm not sure yet how far and in which direction the pendulum will swing, but I do know that we are in the middle of a pendulum swing, and we better ride the wrecking ball.
I love it. Well, listen, Myrna, I introduced you in the beginning. I was Dorothy, and you were all three of these characters I may have met. If we think of charter school advocacy strength as Dorothy, right? Our Dorothy has met three incredible characters in Starlee and Myrna and Andrew. And the fact that you guys are linking arms together, you are going to put our movement in a far stronger position, and you are going to help us, get to that Emerald City. So I just feel incredible gratitude for everything that you guys are doing. I feel great gratitude for you guys, spending an hour or a little bit more with us today, and just keep going. And if there's anything that, CharterFolk or I personally can be doing to help you guys beat on me mercilessly, your work is as important as anything that's happening in our movement today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jed. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jed. Good to be with you.
Thank you.